What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Taste Like Music. This is Discovering Bob Dylan, the weekly podcast where I try my damnedest to appreciate Bob Dylan because I'm a Dylan denier, doubter, disapprover. I'm not the biggest Dylan fan, is what I'm trying to say, but I'm trying to work through it. I have, as always, Dylan Sevey, my co-host, and Dylan educator, professor. He's here to help me, discover the positives, the good stuff about Bob Dylan. We're working through it. We're already on his fourth album here, Another Side of Bob Dylan. Well, how are you, Dylan? Let's talk about you for a minute.
I'm doing good. I think professor and educator is a bit much. Bit too rich for my blood. You're talking to a guy that failed Spanish 101 in college, so it's up. And also, if you ask the real fans in our and I've been having such a blast reading and responding to a lot of the really loyal fans in the comments so far. And if I was really an educator, then I'd be stopping every 5 seconds to say, well, we need to talk about the Carnegie Hall concert in '63, which, if at the end of this you are truly a believer and a fan, then we will go into all of the bootlegs and the concerts and everything like that. But for now, we'll try to keep going with the studio records, and I'll see if I can keep it on track as best I can that way.
All right, so you don't have your PhD in Bob Dylan, is what you're trying to say, but I mean,
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's only so much we can talk. We're trying to keep these episodes not super long.
because we only have a 40-minute time frame because I haven't upgraded my Zoom, which is the
Precisely.
only reason why they're exactly 40 minutes long.
Yeah.
Um,
I would love to talk about how great the live version of North Country Blues is at the Carnegie Hall show, and so on and so forth. But we got so much we got to get to.
we do. I would like to mention that in the comments, you are the hero, and I am sort of like tolerated, which I think is great for everyone. I like being kind of the villain. I'm not maybe not the villain, but do antagonist or whatever the word is. Well, you are the hero, the protagonist of this podcast. But all right, so one thing we forgot to do last time, and I meant to bring it up, we forgot to talk about the album covers. The times they are changing. I always thought Dylan was a bit of a Streisand, but he's really rocking the shit on the times they are changing. He looks like he's like 50 years old. It's great. It really matches. It's sepia toned and it perfectly match. Free Will and his little, happy peppy. Like, I mean, it's sort of, whimsical, down the street of New York with his girlfriend. The first one, he looks like a child. But on another side of Bob Dylan, I think it's like he's posing for like the back page of his book or something. He's very sort of like, just here I am. I'm Bob Dylan. I'm a poet now. I'm a big shot.
Well, it's interesting, it's kind of funny to some degree to me that this album is called Another Side of Bob Dylan, because it's not as if he hadn't showcased his ability to write a good humorous song on freewheeling or love songs or personal songs or what have you. Even on Times They Are Changing, you've got One Too Many Mornings and Boots of Spanish Leather. But yeah, at this time, even though he's displayed that, he's definitely, going a little more introspective and worldly, and in some ways like following along with trends, including fashion trends, which you can see, kind of on the cover there. It's funny, at this point in time in the public's eye, Bob Dylan is the protest singer. He's the spiritual successor to Woody Guthrie, the voice of the generation. And like we hit on at the end of the episode, and maybe people even thought this looking at the album cover and seeing him posing for the back of his book, this was kind of seen as a betrayal in some ways. Far before people were screaming Judas at him for going electric, he was getting called out in the press for this. Really popular quote here. Erwin Silber, who wrote for Sing Out, which was a magazine centered around folk music and whatnot, wrote an open letter saying, "Your new songs seem to be all inner directed now, inner probing and self conscious." And right before the album had been released, he debuted a few of these songs at the Newport Folk Festival, and they were mostly received well there. But based on what Erwin Silber saw, that some of the paraphernalia of fame was getting in your way. And then the other quote, and all of these are readily available on Wikipedia. David Horowitz called these songs in this album an unqualified failure of taste and self-critical awareness. It's really funny, again, because it's not like every single song that this guy wrote was Times They Are A-Changin or Ballad Hollis Brown, but man, now we're singing some personal songs and people are already pissed. I'm interested to see how you're feeling.
Well, it's interesting. I had that same quote highlighted because I did find it interesting. The folk community kind of turned on its golden boy, who they had, kind of put forth as, this is like the guy. This is the person to sing about the times, the moment. Like he's sort of our figurehead for this whole, folk singer movement. And then boom, they turn on him real quick. Said that he lost touch with people, caught up in paraphernalia of fame, like you said. And it's interesting because what I was reading is he was working on a book, didn't quite come together because it was sort of just like stream of conscious, just kind of rambling and mumbling. But he also went on a 20-day trip across the US and just like talked to common people. He was listening to the Beatles songs. And I don't know if people thought he dismissed them as sort of bubblegum, and maybe he did at the time, but later he recalls being impressed by their music, especially I Want to Hold Your Hand, just the chords and everything, the harmonies. So he's obviously kind of caught up in popular music as well. He's doing the folk thing, but he's hearing what everyone else is doing. So you get another side of Bob Dylan where he ostensibly kind of delves into the pop world a little bit. It seems like he's still basically doing the same thing, but just his focus, is no longer topical. It's no longer about the injustices in the world for the most part. It's more, he writes a bunch of songs about his relationship with Susie Rotolo. There's a couple just like stream of consciousness songs, like I Shall Be Free number 10 and Motorpsycho Nightmare, where, Motorpsycho Nightmare is based on Psycho a little bit, sort of within this weird dream he's having. I don't know. It's a very odd song lyrically. So he's definitely getting into different things. Maybe the other side is just not folk because it's still him. There's one song with piano, Black Crow Blues. Everything else, acoustic guitar, harmonica. It's just Bob Dylan. It was recorded in like one night. Still Tom Wilson on production. So despite it, being called on the side of Bob Dylan, it's mostly the same Dylan that we're used to, just sort of focused on different topics. At least that's what I was hearing. And my thoughts on this album, it is my least favorite so far. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One, I don't see much growth. He's still cribbing from Renaissance, no, what's a Scarborough Fair for melodies. There's a couple real stinkers in here. I think Ballad in Plain D, probably a black spot in his whole career. It's one that he regrets writing. Basically, a hatchet job on Susie Rotolo's sister and mother, and that's 8 minutes and 16 seconds of just like kind of showing that he's kind of a dick, a little bit of a narcissist, which I mean he's a rock star, so of course he's going to have some. But and maybe this goes back to the Birds versions that I've heard first, and it's hard for me to like strip away those golden harmonies and that beautiful 12-string Rickenbacker. And a song like All I Really Want to Do, which I tolerate from the Byrds, is one of my least favorite Dylan songs. And it kicks off the whole album. And I know he's trying like new stuff with that rhyming scheme, but the way he rhymes the same word like over and over and sort of silly, it just a little cloying to me. The now I ain't looking to fight with you, frighten you, or uptighten you, drag you down, or drain you down, calm you down, or bring you down. It doesn't work for me. I mean, and I like his energy. Like he's committed to it. He's doing like the little laughs and the chuckles. And I think his vocal range is stronger. And it's stronger on this whole album. I think he does some of his best vocal work. I really like Spanish Harlem Incident, I think is my standout track on here. Chimes of Freedom is good. I prefer the Byrds version. My Back Pages, I don't know. The rhymes and the words and like the metaphors and similes he's using don't quite work for me in this stripped down manner. I think the Byrds, they really focus on the melody, and I think it works for them. But the way Dylan even sings the chorus part of My Back Pages, where he's sort of like doing this zigzag, like he's kind of zigzagging all over the place, and it's really awkward. And I didn't like it. And maybe it's just because I love the Byrds, like perfect harmonized, like little come down version where they throw in like a bridge and stuff. But I just don't see enough growth here. I don't think, at least right now, his domestic songs and his personal songs and his stream of conscious songs are as strong as the topical ones. Like I never thought I'd like miss something like ridiculously dark and stark like Ballad of Hollis Brown, but I'm kind of missing that here. And I don't know, I had a feeling something like this would happen eventually, because 65, we'll get to that, but this is sort of where he goes from what I like about Dylan apparently into a different direction. And this other side of Dylan just didn't work for me, like his folky protest topical songwriting. So what did I miss here? Like, why am I not getting this album, do you think? Speechless.
There's so much about what you just said that I
Wait. Start with what you like about it. Like, why do you like this album? I know you love this album. So before you get into how wrong I am about this album, let's just hear your thoughts, your take, what you like, what you think Dylan has done, his growth, all the things that I said that was wrong. The floor is yours.
the obligatory, you're not wrong. None of us are wrong. This is all subjective and we have our own opinions. A part of me, it's weird to me saying that I think this album is underrated, because I think that most fans do enjoy and value it to some degree. And it's got a few songs that have really stood the test of time, most notably It Ain't Me, Babe. But I do think it's like as close as anything can be in terms of music to objectively being better than some fans already give it credit for. I think it's overlooked in the conversation of great Dylan albums. For me, like I mentioned in the last episode, this is where that surrealistic poeticism that we all, admire, if not love, from his mid 60s electric output, it begins here. Right at the top of My Back Pages, crimson flames tied through my ears, rolling high and mighty traps, pounced with fire on flaming roads, using ideas as my maps. Right off the bat, for you to say that there's no growth here, or that he's just doing the same thing here, there's nothing like that. Chimes of Freedom, I've always kind of heard is like an almost sequel to A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, kind of with its apocalyptic imagery. And it's funny, demonstrating that he's not completely shutting out the world around him. Chimes of Freedom is a rather political song, or at least some sort of societal commentary, one of the original, like, I See You songs. But as much as it is a semi-sequel, The Hard Rains Are Gonna Fall, there's nothing on Freewheeling or Times They Are A-Changin, like, through the mad mystic hammering of the wild ripping hail, the sky cracked its poems in naked wonder. I mean, that shit is unreal to me. And then you think about, again, some of these songs we're going to hear coming up. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, Queen Jane, Approximately Vintage Joanna, these character studies. You get that here in something like To Ramona. I think one of the most stunning love ballads in his entire catalog, very Shakespearean. Ramona, Come Closer, Shut Softly Your Watery Eyes. Spanish Harlem Incident, about the gypsy gal, not necessarily an epic like some of those songs I just talked about, but it's on my short list of underappreciated Dylan songs. Lots of great lyrical nuggets. I've been wondering all about me ever since I seen you there on the cliffs of your wildcat charms. I'm riding. I know I'm round you, but I don't know where. Really great guitar work, a super vast melody. And this to me is like one of the first things I point to when I say, like, if someone doesn't like the sound of Bob Dylan's voice, that's fair. There are a bunch of singers I don't like the sounds of their voice of. But to say he's not a good singer, like, he spans 2 whole octaves in Spanish Harlem Incident, Gypsy Gal, the hands of Harlem, and eventually, you have slain me, you have made me. He's all over the place, handles it great. I think his voice also really shines on I Don't Believe You, which one of his best tales of heartbreak. I think that song I have a really personal attachment to. I don't know, man. And even Ballad in Plain D is a very, I want to say, divisive song, but I think most people don't think too highly of it. I think the last lyric, everything else that comes before it, and there are some really accusatory, dickish lyrics throughout that whole, your parasite sister. But to end that song with Are the Birds Free from the Chains of the Skyway? I mean, like, that to me in and of itself saves it from being like the worst song in his catalog or anything like that. And then on top of that, like, he's foreshadowing the genre shifting that defines the next record. But like that boogie woogie piano on Black Crow Blues, there's nothing like that before. It's kind of like a curio on this album, and I really like that. And okay, we have to talk about the Byrds. I like the Byrds. They are more of a songs band for me than they are an album band. They are not one of my all-time favorites. I wouldn't say they're one of my like top 50 artists, but they've got a lot of stuff I really like. And I do like some of their Dylan covers. I probably Lay Down Your Weary Tune is my favorite. Initially an unreleased song from the Times They Are Changing sessions. Forgot to mention that, y'all. Sorry, we have 40 minutes on Zoom. And I like their version of My Back Pages too, but when push comes to shove, I'm always going to gravitate towards Dylan's versions for a few reasons. From a song perspective, I generally want to hear all the lyrics that he wrote because they are all necessary in terms of either the story that he's telling or the picture that he's painting. My Back Pages, I think their version only cuts out one verse, and Chimes of Freedom is more than that. Mr. Tambourine Man, which is on the next record, there's a lot more there. From a performance perspective, and this is going to get me into trouble, maybe with you, I don't know, maybe from some people watching. I do not think that Roger McGuinn is a particularly strong vocalist. And obviously, one of the main draws of the Byrds is more so their harmonies. And their harmonies are great, but there's a forcefulness to Dylan's singing that I much prefer to McGuinn's very timid delivery. He's got such a soft, frail voice. And then, all the really nice harmonies come in around it. But like, even something like Spanish Harlem Incident, which I like their cover of that, but I emotionally react more to Dylan singing, I am homeless, come and take, that than the big flowery harmony. And I love a good arrangement. I love a good 12-string guitar. It's nothing against that. I don't know. I think the Byrds in general have a really good sound, but the messages and the resonance of these songs don't come across as well as Dylan's do, in my opinion. And I'm going to piss off our friend Tom Williams, which everyone watching, by the way, Tom has an excellent YouTube channel himself called William Schmilliams. You should subscribe to it. He's fantastic. I know he's a big fan of their version of All I Really Want to Do. I cannot stand their version of All I Really Want to Do. I think it is the lamest, one of the lamest songs in the Birds. Because if you don't like Dylan's version, I get it. I like the sort of rhyming exercise. You know, it kind of reminds me almost of like a precursor to like Blinded by the Light by Springsteen, with like, yeah, how many words can I find to rhyme with this? But I think it's so clever how the first part of each line and the second part are exactly an octave away from each other. I ain't looking to compete with you, beat or treat or mistreat you. Yeah, like I think that's so clever. And for McGuinn to come in with his super frail, I ain't looking to compete with you, beat or cheat or mistreat you, simplify, classify, deny, define. He keeps it there. He doesn't go down the octave, and it's so monotonous and lame, and I can't stand it. I was gonna say I love the Birds. I love songs by the Birds. I think overall I really like the Birds, but I do not get what I want out of these songs when I listen to the Birds version of them, even the ones that I think are really good. But I don't know, man. This album on the surface, it's obviously not as conceptually lucid as the times they were changing, but there's a weariness and a simultaneous amusement in his voice throughout this album that kind of hints at the changes that he's undergoing. And I think there's a lot of humor and a lot of heart on this record. You hear that in his singing. You know, even stuff like I Shall Be Free, Number 10, and Motorpsycho Nightmare. These are kind of the first instances of him referencing a lot of these real world figures and these fictional characters, creating his own little world and stories with them. You're going to see that a lot coming up. I think there's a lot of growth here. I think it's a really fascinating set of songs. I think it's a really great set of songs. And to not even mention It Ain't Me, Babe. I mean, what an incredible melody, heart-wrenching lyrics. I think that's a great performance too. And, you know, sure there'll be a barrage of comments saying, oh, Johnny Cash's version is better. I love Johnny Cash too, but stop. Bob's version for me is the best version. But I don't know. This is my favorite of the acoustic records, honestly. It's neck and neck between Freewheelin'. Freewheelin' is maybe a more important record, but if I'm gonna reach for one, I'm probably gonna reach for this one.
Okay, well, yes, there is growth here, and it is sort of a bridge, especially in that surrealistic stuff that he's really going to get into. Maybe my problem is I don't particularly care for that brand of songwriting from him. It just it never hit me, so that is a bad portent for the next two albums, that's for sure. I do think Dylan's version of Spanish Harlem Incident is superior to the Birds. I will say that one. I like his vocals. Surprise, this blow your mind. I think his vocals in Spanish Harlem Incident are better than the Birds version of it. He sings it more clearly. I think you were right. You know, his range is really good on that. Probably the best I've heard him sing, I think, in any of the songs yet. And yeah, I mean, Black Crow Blues is interesting. It's a little piano part. Chimes of Freedom, probably too long at 7 minutes and 10 seconds, but I like it. And it's not like I dislike this album. I just don't get as much out of it. And I don't really know why. This is the Dylan that I struggle with. This type of songwriting, kind of away from like the simplicity of folk, and he's really cramming in rhymes and words into all these songs, and the stream of consciousness thing is definitely amped up. It's harder for me to get into these songs because a lot of them don't seem to have like a particular point, or maybe I'm missing the point. But something like Hollis Brown, like you really, he's just hammering away at this like singular point in this singular story. And for these, I don't know, I struggle a little with like the Susie Rotolo songs. I like It Ain't Me, Babe, but I don't get what you get out of it, this like beautiful love song or heartbreak song or whatever it is. And I don't know, My Back Pages, like that imagery is decent, but Like I was reading some of the reviews, and the critics are definitely split on this more than any other, at least that I've seen so far. Somebody said My Back Page is the least successful example of the new style, replete with bizarre compound images, corpse evangelists, confusion boats, just like I don't know. To me, like it kind of feels like he's trying too hard to be like profound and prolific sometimes. And maybe not. Maybe I'm just missing the point of Bob Dylan, and I don't get his level of genius as other people. But it just feels like he's a little more like narcissistic here, and a little more arrogant, and there's an air of self-importance to some of this stuff. The melodies aren't quite there for me. Not, there's not a lot of growth as far as the melodies. There's a couple decent melodies, but nothing that I would be like really humming along by myself. You're messing with the Beatles and the Beach Boys now in 64 and the Supremes, and people are really expanding the musical palette. In this, to me, it's like pop, a different type of songwriting, but still stuck in like this sort of too stripped down, folky, lack of anything interesting going on other than the lyrics. And for me, the lyrics aren't as compelling. And I just, somebody in the comments mentioned this. Bob Dylan doesn't write a bridge until like his seventh or eighth. Like, dude hates bridges more than Julius Caesar. And like where is that like break there? Like I need something other than the verse, maybe a chorus, verse. To me, just musically, it's just not as interesting. And something about him not singing topical, like the other albums, I felt like I was getting like a history lesson sometimes, and like a story about a real figure, instead of sort of like, oh, this is what's going on in my head, my dreams. Here's Psycho in a farmhouse, Fidel Castro beard references. Like it just seems all too scattered, and nothing here is really hitting me. And I guess, I mean, I understand if it does really move you and hit you, and the surrealistic imagery that he'll explore more on the rest of the albums, especially coming up in 65. But to me, it just doesn't quite hit home. The other side of Bob Dylan, I like the other side of Bob Dylan, I guess, the real folky stuff. And I don't know, it'll be interesting to see what I feel about Bringing It All Back Home, because that has always been my least favorite Dylan record that I've heard. We'll just spoiler, Bring It All Back Home, I always struggled with a lot, and I've tried to listen to it and tried to get into it. And now that I hear another side of Bob Dylan that makes a little more sense, that I don't love this one either. So, and they feel like, Bring It All Back Home is the electric version of another side of Bob Dylan in some ways. Like it's the bridge to Bring It All Back Home. And then, I guess he perfects the style with Highway 61, but it's making more sense for me anyway, why I'm not the biggest Dylan fan. And this album sort of shows me what, it's the sum of all my fears about Bob Dylan, I guess.
I understand a lot of what you're saying, and I think a lot of what you're saying ultimately at the end of the day, as much as it doesn't make for great debate or conversation, unfortunately, but just accepting that sometimes it is just a matter of subjectivity and taste and whatnot. Like for me, like in something like My Back Pages, which I think there is a greater point. I mean, again, yeah, we're coming off of 1.5 records where there's kind of this greater message to society on so many of these songs. There's a song like My Back Pages is him commenting on, my God, I've been taking myself so seriously, and maybe to some degree like playing into this image of what people are trying to put me in. And I also don't disagree with what you were saying, that he's getting maybe a little more arrogant, he's getting a little more narcissistic in some ways. I don't disagree with that, but for him to also be having this realization of like, I've been like playing this role of, the voice of a generation. Like, he wasn't searching for that, but that's what was put upon him. Like, I was so much older then, I'm younger than that now. Like, I am realizing that, hey, I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. What's the lyric that always gets me? Fearing not that I'd become my enemy in the instant that I preach. Like, basically say, like, someone in the comments of Times They Changed, they said, oh, this is his finger pointing album, and like he's saying it right here. And for songs like It Ain't Me, Babe, again, like, there is a beautiful simplicity to me. Go away from my window, leave at your own chosen speed. I'm not the one you want, babe. I'm not the one you need. Like, I don't know. I think that we've all been in those situations where we have to come to terms with the fact that something that has been working for us is no longer working. And shit, I might need to be the bad guy in this situation to point it out, because one of us is going to have to make the call here. In terms of, and I love the imagery. I love the corpse evangelists. I love the half direct prejudice leap forth. Like, to me, it's one of those things. I understand if that doesn't resonate with you as much as, I guess, some of the more straightforward. So, I mean, we call them straightforward. I mean, lyrical masterpieces that are on Freewheeling and Times They Are Changing. But to me, it's just the difference between a Monet and a Picasso. And there's so many different ways to do things. And when he throws in a lot of that imagery, to me, it's not always necessarily like, oh, look at me throwing around these big words and how smart I am. It's half the time more just like, this sounds really cool. Like, the syntax of these words sound really, really interesting, and I'm able to fit them in here into this greater story. And we'll get into that more certainly with songs like Gates of Eden and whatnot on the next record. I can understand if it's not totally your thing. The other thing too is, like, I don't want all my music to sound the same. Like, one of the things I love about the Beatles is some of their bridges and some of their harmonic arrangements and whatnot. But I listen to the Beatles for a different reason than I listen to Bob Dylan, for a different reason than I listen to Led Zeppelin, for a different reason than I listen to Miles Davis. I don't see, personally, for me, ever thinking like, oh, well, this is 1964 and A Hard Day's Night has just come out, and this doesn't sound like A Hard Day's Night, so I don't like it as much. I can understand why for you it might be hard to divorce, like, man, I really love these Birds versions of it. I love the sound of the birds and the harmonies of the guitars and everything. So hearing them without that feels a little empty to me. To me, it's simply just two different things. So again, it doesn't make for the best conversation to say, oh, I disagree, and that's okay. But at the end of the day, it's I don't think, though, it's worth devaluing. And that being said, we're going to get into a string of records now where a lot of his songwriting is more based around some of this surrealistic and psychedelic imagery, not devoid, in my opinion, of any greater point whatsoever. But yeah, now we're getting into bringing it all back home. And this is it. We're going electric outside of some light bass and drums on Karina Karina on Freewheelin'. And the non-album single around the same time, Mixed Up Confusion. We're getting full on electric Dylan for the first time. Lots of electric guitars and pianos and organs. And similar to Freewheelin', I suppose I could say going into this as an album that you already know to some degree, just hearing it for the first time in the context with his discography, coming out of another side, hearing how his voice and his writing is shifting, and seeing how it hits you this time around. Obviously, I'm not setting my hopes high, knowing that Another Side hasn't been your favorite, and that Bringing It All Back Home historically has not been your favorite. But I still think, you also had never heard Another Side before. This record, you have some preconceived notions. We're on shaky ground right now. It's probably easier for you to be like, I can tell I'm not going to like this, but you've surprised me with 3 other albums so far. I don't expect you to come back with a 5-star bring it all back home review, but I am hopeful that you are going to hear some things and consider some things that you haven't before.
Everything you said, getting just jumping back to another side real quick. Perhaps I was a little harsh, and I got to play up the dislike a little bit because for me, like I'll be like, I hate an album, 3.5 stars. It's sort of my thing. And I think
What do people
I
want?
still give this one 3.5 stars. Like I don't hate it. I don't think it's a bad album in any way. I just find it full of a lot more flaws, at least for me, than his previous records. And there was a couple songs, I didn't care for on Freewheelin', but it had like those five, you know, historic generational, songs. And same with the Times They Are A-Changin'. It has the Times They Are A-Changin'. It's a song that will live forever. And to me, this one just didn't quite have those highs. And Ballad in Plain D just really sort of irked me in a way that sort of torpedoed the whole record because I do think Spanish Harlem Incident's very nice, and Chimes of Freedom is great. To Ramona's good. I Don't Believe You. She Acts Like We Never Have Met. I think it was really pretty. Might be his prettiest song yet. And It Ain't Me, Babe is good. It's a little long. It's 50 minutes. Of course, it's Bob Dylan. So it's not like I hated it, but I did expect to like this one more just from, I like the Birds songs and I thought it would translate a little bit better. Not that I don't like it, not that I think it's, crap or anything. It's just a little disappointing after 3 albums in a row that sort of took me by surprise at how much I like them. This is the first time I've been a little disappointed in what Bob's brought to the table. Maybe I just need to spend a little more time with it. I don't know.
I don't know if it's something that you've said in a video in the past or if it's written down somewhere. Maybe it's on your Rate Your Music. I don't remember, but I seem to recall a Joe classic being 3.5 stars. It's good, but I don't care. So and I anticipated going into the series that we'd get a lot of 3.5s. It's good, I don't care, and that's fine. I also do think if one of your bigger issues with Dylan is not always relating to the kind of psychedelic, surrealistic imagery and stuff like that, kind of the stuff that it's tough to say what he's known for. I feel like there's so many things, that you could say he's known for, but I do think, the cinematic masterpiece Walk Hard, the Dewey Cox story. There's the great scene where he goes through his Dylan phase, and a reporter asks him like, have a lot of people been telling you that your stuff sounds like Bob Dylan? And he says, why are people saying I sound like Bob Dylan? Why didn't anyone ask Bob Dylan why he sounds like me? And it cuts to Dewey Cox singing, mailboxes drip like lampposts in the twisted birth canal, the Coliseum. So, people think of him with the funny voice and the lyrics that like make no sense, but people are like, oh my God, they're so brilliant. But to me, I think there's a misunderstanding, at least for me, like, I don't listen to some of these insane phrases and think, oh, well, it's the I am the walrus thing. John wrote that song thinking like people are always analyzing every lyric, so I'm going to write something that makes no fucking sense. But it's a piece of art in itself for me because it creates all of this insane imagery, Semolina Pilchard climbing up the Eiffel Tower. What does that mean? I don't know. But to quote Will Ferrell in Blades of Glory, it gets the people going. It is an artwork in and of itself. And for me, it's recognizing, I'm jumping ahead quite a few records here, and we'll get to it when we get to it. But one of his maybe more famous songs from Blonde on Blonde, I Want You. The verses are like quintessential. The guilty undertaker sighs, the lonesome organ grinder cries, the silver saxophone sash refuse you. And I'm not sitting there saying, okay, what's the lonesome organ grinder? Who is that? What are the silver saxophones? What do they make? For me, it's about when it gets to the chorus of that song, I want you. I want you. I want you so bad. And hearing the yearning in his voice. And I think about how many times in my life, especially on, I don't know, a podcast like this, where I'm stammering and like trying to figure out what I want to say. And sometimes what I want to say is as simple as, I want you. And that's it. And the rest is just my mind going. So it's the same thing with a lot of these songs. It's not about like, oh, well, he's being so arrogant using all these phrases and thinking he's smarter than us, like, and this is like way above everything else. It's creating the imagery, making the picture. I generally am with you in the sense that I love a good relatable lyric. It's why Tom Petty is one of my favorite songwriters of all time, because he's very simplistic, but he's never stupid. He's always so smart, so honest, so emotional, so direct. But I really, truly do appreciate what Dylan accomplishes, with this sort of mid-60s surrealism. In some ways it's a sign of the times, or a portrait of the times. He never really goes back to it. On albums like Blood on the Tracks and Desire, there's a lot of these big sprawling epics and a lot of great imagery, but it's more rooted in reality. I think it's just fascinating for what it is, and nobody else was doing it at least this good, and no one else had done it before. I just think it's an absolutely brilliant way to write and to convey something. If it's not ultimately your thing, that's fine. But I do think I'm bringing it all back home. There's a lot more, a song like Subterranean Homesick Blues, that's very clearly a social commentary. Your beloved Maggie's Farm, a social commentary. It's All Right, Mom, Only Bleeding, clearly a social commentary. And they're starting to get wrapped up more in some of these characters and these figures and these phrases, or I'm not telling you that you have to love this or you should love this. But now that you have these, we'll say, 3 albums of original material that you've listened to, you've now heard a lot of different sides already, no pun intended. The love songs, the protest songs, the worldly songs, the intrapersonal songs. And now we're about to hear a lot of them with a grander soundscape. I think what he starts on Another Side of Bob Dylan is just an unbelievable way to talk about all of these things that he's already talked about to one degree or another, and painting them with all of these brilliant different brushes and strokes. Again, if it's not your favorite thing, that's totally fine. But I do think that you'll find something to enjoy on this, or maybe something more than you've previously enjoyed in this record. I'm interested to see specifically how you feel about some of the songs like She Belongs to Me, Love Minus Zero, No Limit. Technically electric songs, but still with a lot of melody, the ballads, a lot of heartfelt imagery and lyricism going on there. So I'm hopeful. In my heart of hearts, I feel like I know we're heading for another 3.5. It's good, but I don't care. But I'm gonna try to be optimistic. Maybe we'll make it to a 4, because I have a big attachment to Bring It All Back Home, but we'll get there on the next episode.
All right. I do. It's interesting because I do know this one, and from what I've heard, what I just heard of Another Side of Bob Dylan, that psychedelic imagery, I know he gets better at it, and I know I like what he does with it later more. So perhaps I will like this one more than Another Side of Bob Dylan. I'll really focus on that kind of imagery and see if I can get into the protest stuff, because I know, again, I know what he's going for more now, and I think it's just been the melodies and sort of that repetition of verses and not really much else, that always sort of threw me off the Dylan train. I think I got a lot of that on Another Side of Bob Dylan. A lot of the stuff that I don't love without really, you know, having any connection to the lyrics. So we'll see if I like this one more now that I've heard that one and that I've heard his first stuff. And we'll see if I like the electric side a bit more. It could happen. I have this one. I have Bring It All Back Home right now, 3.5 stars. That's what it's rated as on my big sheet. So we'll see if it can go up from there. It's a low 3.5. It's certainly not one of my favorites.
It is very interesting to me that you deem the majority of Another Side to be not very melodic, because I hear, and yeah, some of the talk and blues songs like I Shall Be Free, Motorpsycho, Nightmare, not so much, but like whether or not you like All I Really Want to Do, I can understand. Again, that juxtaposition of the two octaves and then same thing into the All I Really Want to Do. I mean, that's really huge. I think to Ramona, subtly, Ramona, come closer, shut softly your watery eyes. And then no use in trying to deal with the dying, though I cannot explain that in lines. I mean, he's really pretty. Spanish Harlem is a beautiful melody. It Ain't Me, Babe is a beautiful melody. I Don't Believe You, I think, is a beautiful melody. You know,
And it
I
ain't
don't
me,
know.
babe. It's just another Scarborough affair, and you can't convince me otherwise. It
It's not
says it on
how it
Wikipedia. It says it on Wikipedia. It's not. The melodies are fine. They're just not. It just feels like the same melodies from his first three albums, maybe a little different. I do think Spanish Harlem Incident, like I said many times, has a very good vocal part, a strong melody, but All I Really Want to Do just bugs the hell out of me. Maybe it does have a great melody, but it annoys me, so I can't like it.
the Birds version is 1,000 times more annoying. Sorry, Tom, and all the Birds fans out there, but that's just me.
I mean, I don't disagree that much. I That's probably my least favorite Birds song, actually, until, post 1968 it gets worse.
Sure.
I don't know. It's tough. This is a tough album for me.
No, this is one. Another Side is again divisive, quote unquote. I think it still more often than not has a somewhat fine reputation, but it's often not thought of as highly as the two that came before it. There are a lot of people. There are people who feel similarly to you about it. There's some people who hear it as a detriment that he recorded it in one night, and they're like, "Oh, he sounds like too lackadaisical, like he doesn't care." I don't hear that at all. I hear a guy changing in real time, shifting in real time, both vocally, and that's another thing that we've talked about, or that we haven't really talked about, is his voice hasn't been like extremely different with each record, but if you listen to each record, it is slightly getting there. And I think in this one, you hear he's starting to lean in a little more. To me, Blonde on Blonde is the only album where he sounds like the Dylan impression that everyone does. Everybody sings like this and they impersonate him. And he never sounds like that, except on Blonde. He sounds like that there. But he's starting to get there a little bit. There's a little bit more, yeah, maybe brattiness in his vocals on Another Side. But to me, it's just again the sound of him kind of going, you know what? I don't think I want to be pigeonholed into this one thing. Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, they were these guys, and that's great, but I am not looking to just be that guy. There's a famous interview with him where he calls himself a song and dance man, which, rather than a songwriter. And yeah, I think that this is it's the beginning of something. It's the beginning of something that may not ultimately be your favorite thing, but the shift into Bring It All Back Home, I'm fascinated. I'm terrified, but I'm fascinated.
Well, I'll finally get to completely tell my Rage Against the Machine story in that episode. So that's something everyone should be looking forward to. We have gone deep into the night here. Excellent discussion. I'm sorry I don't feel the same way about Another Side. Well, I'll revisit it someday. But for now, we got to go electric. It's time. Judas be damned. Next episode, we will be discussing Bringing It All Back Home. And that's it. That's it for Another Side. Hope you enjoyed the video. like this video, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook, X, Instagram, follow whatever Dylan's doing, buy his band's record. If he has, do you have a YouTube channel, Dylan?
Like, kind of. You don't need to. If you
Okay,
want to see, if you
we
want to
won't
see my
talk about
band,
that, but
yeah,
follow him on Instagram. You have a good Instagram, right? Okay, follow him
sure.
on Instagram. Let's see, what does Jason usually say here? Leave your comments in the comments section. Let us know what you think of this discussion, what you think of Another Side of Bob Dylan. Are you as scared as Dylan is to hear my take on Bringing It All Back Home? You should be. Check back next week, and we'll be talking about it then. We'll see you later.